JFK. We still ask ourselves, who killed JFK? Well, let's look back at what was happening at that time. Back then,
prominent men made an unprecedented attempt to lift the veil of secrecy surrounding UFOs. In the end, it may have been their undoing.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
1961. President John F. Kennedy announces America's intention to land a man on the moon. Politically, it is an attempt to keep pace with the Soviet Union in the space race. But many experts believe that behind the scenes, the moon mission was about much more than national pride.
The real reason why President Kennedy wanted to get men to the moon was that he was aware that this was a way in which the national security apparatus in the United States could share information about UFOs. From the early 1950s, national security people in the United States were aware that there were alien bases on the moon.
The president believes the Soviets have their own secret alien files and suspects they are working with recovered UFO technology in their top-secret base at Kapustin Yar. But the CIA keeps the most sensitive UFO intelligence hidden from the president. Kennedy realizes that the future of the human race hangs in the balance. Immediate action is needed to prevent the moon from falling into enemy hands, human or otherwise. He decides to use the moon mission as means to force the CIA to begin sharing vital UFO information. Unknown to Kennedy, Khrushchev too is concerned about alien activity, leading to an unprecedented show of trust between the two global rivals.
November 12, 1963, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had agreed with President Kennedy that the Soviet Union and the United States would jointly launch missions to the moon, and that part of this agreement required the intelligence divisions of both the Soviet Union and the United States to share all information concerning UFOs.
But just 10 days after the two leaders come to terms, the unthinkable happens. Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas. And less than a year later, Khrushchev is removed from office. Was this a coincidence? Or was this sequence of events somehow tied to the two leaders' secret agreement to share UFO intelligence? Did someone or something orchestrate their fall from power?
back then, he had plans to abolish the Federal Reserve System, which prints worthless money backed by nothing and charges interest on it, making the debtor nation to a group of international bankers. He wanted the United States notes that he signed, a presidential document called the Executive Order 11110 on June 4th, 1963. This gave JFK, the president, legal clearance to create true money that would belong to the people, eliminate the Federal Reserve Bank and their false money. Kennedy had already begun issuing the government money that was free of debt to replace the Federal Reserve dollars we had been using. A number of Kennedy bills were indeed issued with the heading U.S. Note instead of Federal Reserve Note, but quickly were withdrawn after Kennedy's death. Records show that Kennedy issued $4,222,893,825 of true money. It was clear that Kennedy was out to eliminate the criminal Federal Reserve System. It was interesting to note, only one day after Kennedy's assassination, that all the United States notes which he issued were called out of circulation. All of the money the President Kennedy had created was destroyed. Not a word was said to the American people. See, and here's a picture of it. United States note. Okay. Let's scroll down and read some more. This gets pretty interesting. Kennedy bill issued in 1963 with United States notes replacing the Federal Reserve note. In 1963, the Joint Chiefs of Staff presented Kennedy with Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods would have had our own government inflicting terrorist attacks on United States citizens, blaming it on our enemies to justify wars and political assassinations. Kennedy rejected it and planned to abolish the CIA's right to conduct covert operations, eventually dismantle it. Kennedy said he would splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Kennedy's intent to abolish the Federal Reserve Bank, his rejection of Operation Northwoods, and his plan to eliminate the CIA operations planted scroll down here if I can get this button to work. Planted the seeds for his CIA assassination of him. Lee Harvey Oswald was linked virtually to every group that had a reason to want Kennedy dead. In the years before Kennedy's death, as a Marine, Oswald worked in the radar department operator at U-2 spy plane bases. After leaving the Marines, he defected to the Soviet Union. While in Russia, he married the niece of the KGB colonel, and he lived in relative luxury, likely to exchange false or already outdated information on the U-2 that he passed on to the Russians. Oswald apparently pretended to be a traitor to America while actually working for the CIA. On returning to the U.S., Oswald propagandized for Castro's Cuba out of a New Orleans building that he shared with the CIA/FBI agent trying to overthrow Castro named Guy Bannister. Scroll down a little bit more. Delphine Roberts worked for Bannister. She said that Mr. Bannister had been a special agent for the FBI and CIA and saw her CIA agent boss meet Lee Harvey Oswald on September 1963. The story was supported by her daughter, who also met Oswald during this period. Oswald also distributed propaganda, pro-Castro leaflets to New Orleans in 1963 with the address of his CIA contact Bannister stamped on them. There's the famous picture of him all beat up. There was a 3-page letter of the CIA director, John McCone, on the Secret Service to the Secret Service Chief James Rowley, in which McCone acknowledges Oswald's worked for the CIA and was in Russia for the purpose, not as a defector. It was discussed how this information should be withheld from the Warren Commission. Allen Dulles' advice to the other members of the Warren Commission was that the CIA operatives consider it their patriotic duty to lie under oath, if necessary, to protect the company's secrets. A Dallas deputy sheriff named Alan Sweat was quoted as saying that Oswald was being paid $200 a month by the government at the time of the assassination and was assigned an informant number. In other words, a spy. In October 1963, Oz moved to Dallas, where he got a job in the Texas Book Depository for $1.25 an hour boxing and shipping books. This thing scrolls down way too much. Okay. It's beyond strange how someone who was so clearly connected to the CIA would just happen to get a job working at one of the best sniping points in Dallas, by which the president's open car motorcade would just happen to be passing by in a few weeks after he started working there. Oswald was set up to be the fall guy. On November 22nd, 1963, at the book depository around 12:15, Caroline Arnold saw Oswald in the second-floor snack room where she said he had a Coke. He was sitting in one of the booths alone as usual and appeared to be having lunch, she testified. I did not speak to him, but I recognized him clearly. I remember that at 12:15 or later, it was 12:15 or later. It could have been 12:25, 5 minutes before the assassination. I don't exactly remember. At the same time, Bonnie Ray Williams was on the 6th floor until 12:20, and she saw nobody. Down on the street, Arnold Rowland saw two men in the 6th floor window. Presumably, Bonnie Ray Williams finished his lunch and left. And here's a picture of them right before. Kennedy's motorcade was running late, and he was due at the Trade Mart at 12:25. If Oswald was one of the assailants, who was pretty nonchalant about getting himself into position. Later, it was told Dallas police he was standing in the second-floor snack room a maximum of 90 seconds after the Kennedy was shot. Patrolman Marion Baker ran into Oswald in that second-story lunchroom, and let me scroll down. And he asked Oswald's boss, "Do you know this man? Is he an employee?" And he told Baker that he was. As Baker moved on, he told Oswald, "The president has been shot," and Oswald reacted as if he had heard it for the first time. What the official party line would have us believe is that after firing 3 bolt-action shots in 6 seconds, Oswald left 3 cartridges neatly side by side in the firing nest, wiped the rifle clear of all fingerprints, stashed the rifle on the other side of the loft, sprinted down 5 flights of stairs past Victoria Adams and Sandra Stiles, who would have never seen him, then show up cool, calm, and collected on the 2nd floor in front of Patrolman Baker within 90 seconds of the shooting of the president. Was he out of breath? According to Baker, absolutely not. Oswald was a patsy. Let me scroll down. As he claimed. Most certainly, whatever can be said of Oswald, one thing is certain: he is either knowingly or unknowingly a pawn for those responsible for assassinating Kennedy. Jack Ruby, Oswald's assailant, had been stalking Oswald from the time immediately following the assassination to the moment he shot him. Philip Willis took a series of 12 photos of Dealey Plaza where the Kennedy was shot. In the minutes before and after the assassination, Mr. Willis's photos, testimony before the Warren Commission appear in the Warren Commission report. He was not questioned about the 8th photo, a shot of the book depository entrance shortly after the assassination. As Willis pointed out, one of the men in the photo looked so much like Jack Ruby, Oswald's soon-to-be assailant. It was pitiful. FBI agent questioning Willis agreed with him that the man bore a powerful resemblance to Ruby. Okay, let me scroll down. When Willis mentioned this to the commission, no interest was shown. When the photo was published in the Warren Report, a considerable part of the Ruby look-alike face had been cropped away. What was the final straw that pushed the government to assassinate Kennedy? On October 11, 1963, Kennedy signed a National Security Memorandum, an NSA Memorandum number 263, which ordered 1,000 American advisors home from Vietnam by December 25, 1963, and that the remainder of the U.S. military be withdrawn by 1965. Kennedy's and Johnson's Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, has said that Kennedy was going to pull out of Vietnam after the 1964 election. In the film The Fog of War, not only does McNamara say this, but the tape recording of Lyndon B. Johnson confirms that Kennedy was planning to withdraw the troops from Vietnam, a position Johnson states he disapproved of. Okay, scroll down. The day after Kennedy's funeral on November 26, 1963, Lyndon Johnson signed the National Security Resolution number 273, which completely reversed Kennedy's plan to withdraw from Vietnam. Then Johnson fraudulently used the Gulf Tonkin Resolution as a blank check to fund the massive military buildup in Vietnam. As an agreement by Johnson apparently made with the CIA in exchange for him taking out Kennedy and handing the presidency to him. This is a picture of the wink of the Congressman Albert Thomas knowingly winks at a smiling LBJ after the assassination. There is evidence that Lyndon Johnson was directly involved. Johnson had been ducking down in the car a good 30 to 40 seconds before the first shots were fired. Even before the car turned onto Houston Street, Lyndon Johnson was acting as if he knew bullets would be flying, ducking down repeatedly before the shots rang out. At the ceremony, Johnson was being sworn in as president. Congressman Albert Thomas was photographed knowingly winking at and smiling at the president, while JFK's grieving widow stood next to Johnson. The night before Kennedy's assassination, Johnson met with Dallas tycoons, FBI moguls, and organized crime kingpins. Johnson's mistress, Madeline Duncan Brown, recalled that Johnson emerged from the conference to tell her, "After tomorrow, those SOBs, the Kennedys, will never embarrass me again. That's no threat." And then I scroll down. That's no threat. That's a promise. They had this lodge outside of Dallas. They met there on November 21st, 1963, and Johnson chose different people to do certain things for him. The group included Oswald's assassin, Jack Ruby Brown. Brown described Ruby as the in-man in Texas, who could be trusted to arrange all call girls, drugs, gambling fixes, and even contract killings. According to Madeline Brown, the group's meeting included J. Edgar Hoover, Clyde Tolson, and if you don't know what they look like, this is what they look like. That's J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson, his assistant. And John McCloy, Jack Ruby, and numerous mafia kingpins, several newspaper and TV reporters, and Richard Nixon, oddly enough. Over 10 years later, Richard Nixon was forced to resign because of John F. Kennedy's assassination. The break-in at the Watergate offices of the Democratic National Committee would never have become an issue to topple a president, except for the need to protect just why the crime was committed. The Democrats had obtained photographs which showed Nixon, associate of Howard Hunt, to be one of the 3 tramps arrested and released in Dealey Plaza. This is why Hunt led the break-in to Watergate. He was protecting his own keister. Okay. Rather than risk exposure or far worse scandal, Nixon resigned, turning the White House over to Gerald Ford, the Warren Commission member who would later admit that he had altered the official location of JFK's back head wound for the commission. Johnson was still irate when he called Madeleine Brown the morning after the assassination, telling her that Kennedy's family would never embarrass him again. Brown highlighted how people who were set up to testify against Johnson for indictment proceedings related to illegal kickbacks Johnson was receiving from the agriculture programs before the assassination were mysteriously set up for homosexual scandals or even found dead, having allegedly shot themselves 3 times, 5 times in the head. Had the assassination not happened that day that it did, Lyndon Johnson would have probably gone to prison. They would have gotten rid of him, and he was so involved in this. That's what Madeleine Brown said. Okay, immediately following JFK's assassination in Dallas, government agents fanned out through the crowd, confiscating film that had been taken of the Kennedy motorcade. One exception was Abraham Zapruder's movie. The film, purchased by the Time magazine, promptly altered the key frames and eliminated others in order to obstruct and eliminate key evidence of the conspiracy. Those home movies were seized by the government that afternoon and were never seen or heard of again. Regis Kennedy, one of the FBI agents who was gathering up the home movies that afternoon, was subpoenaed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations to explain what happened to all those home movies. On the very day he was set to testify to that committee, he was found murdered. Where was I? He was found murdered. Over 200 key witnesses of the JFK assassination who could have testified the truth of what happened that day have died under mysterious circumstances or have been outright murdered. These are the 3 tramps. Rackle on the front, Sturgis here, and Hunt in the rear. Okay, so what exactly happened? The same hitman of the CIA planned to use against Cuban President Fidel Castro, including the famous Watergate burglars E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, were brought to Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963, immediately after JFK's assassination. Law enforcement officers conducted a search of the area behind the grassy knoll, from which the witnesses heard the gunshots and saw the smoke just after the shots rang out. There were several railroad boxcars in the area. Some of the witnesses saw men running to the fence, from the fence behind the knoll towards the boxcars. As the 3 men were found in one boxcar, they were arrested. These men came to be known as the 3 tramps. They were arrested right after the President of the United States was killed, and strangely enough, the police did not book, photograph, or fingerprint them, and they were released. One thing they didn't expect, however, was how the police led the 3 derelicts through Dealey Plaza to the sheriff's office. They were photographed by several press photographers. When the allegations of the CIA connection to Kennedy's death emerged, these photographs received wide publicity in the newspapers, television on April 28th. 1975 issue of Newsweek magazine. Two of the derelict tramps, as they had become known to be called, bore a striking resemblance to the Nixon burglars, E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, respectively, who both worked for the CIA. The third tramp, often referred to as Raoul, was the bullseye for Martin Luther King's assassination suspect, circulated by the police after King was killed. James Earl Ray would later claim he was set up by a man named Raoul. Probably the same guy. And here's a side-by-side comparison of the boxcar tramp Sturgis in 1963 and as Nixon burglar in 1973. And this one is, which one is he? I forgot his name. Hunt, I guess. And this is Hunt as the tramp, the boxcar tramp in 1963. And this is the picture of Hunt, the guy arrested in the Nixon burglary of Watergate. A book titled The Coup d'etat of America by Alan Weberman and Michael Canfield came out with compelling evidence that the two of the three tramps arrested in Dallas on November 22nd were Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. When the coup d'etat of America came out, Hunt sued for millions of dollars in damages, claiming he could prove that he wasn't the one. Well, where did Hunt sued, that he had been in Washington, D.C. that day on duty at CIA. It turned out, however, that it was not true. So he said he had been on leave doing house errands, and including a shopping trip to a grocery store in Chinatown. And Weberman and Canfield investigated the new alibi and found out that the grocery store that Hunt claimed to be shopping at never existed. At that point, Hunt offered to drop the suit for a token payment of $1. But as the authors who determined to vindicate themselves, they continued to attack Hunt's alibi, ultimately completely shattering it. Using the principles of biometrics, lines and angles were measured to create a template. The template was then laid over for matching. When the pictures of the two derelicts were tested biometrically against Frank Sturgis and Howard Hunt, they came up as a 100% perfect match. It would seem beyond a shadow of a doubt that Hunt and Sturgis worked for the CIA, not only as Nixon's burglars, but also as the team the CIA sent out to assassinate JFK. The truth behind the JFK assassinations will never be told by the establishment. You and I are subject to the corrupt, unjust court system, while they are above the law. The international bankers and all of the branches of organizations are the head of the shadow government, and the assassination of President Kennedy was nothing short of a coup implemented by them. Their pawns in the media keep the American people from learning how the government works, has been overthrown by them, and they have been more or less in complete control of the United States government ever since the assassination of JFK, November 22nd, 1963. And here, something else I was going to show you. Here's a website that just says JFK killed Kennedy. And it goes on and on. And he's got a son by here's the guy whose fingerprints was on the gun. And that LBJ has a son by Madeline that was killed when he tried to get money from the LBJ estate after he was died. He mysteriously died of lymphatic cancer, and that was Madeline's son. His name's Stephen. And let's see. It's a bunch of reading here. And it says the mastermind behind the JFK murder was that, oh well, I can't read this. Let's see. Officially indicted, found LBJ guilty as a co-conspirator from his association with Malcolm Wallace, Billy Saul Estes, and Edward Clark in the 9 murders, including the killing of Henry Marshall, Agricultural Secretary, the killing of George, I can't pronounce, the FBI informant who worked for Estes, the killing of Rogers, his secretary, LBJ's secretary, the killing of Harold Orr, FBI informant, Cole Wade, informant, Joseph Johnson, his LBJ's own sister, Josephia Johnson, and John Kinzer, her boyfriend, and the killing of President Kennedy. And anyway, also, if we have time, I was going to show you, well, hang on. Here's an interview with LBJ's mistress. Let me start it right back up here.
And they were fussing. Some of them were highly disenchanted about John Kennedy coming to Texas. And so here they were wrangling, which was very common. So I was lighthearted, and I said, "Hey guys, I'm going on to Austin. I'll see you guys in Austin tonight." And I blew them a kiss. I walked out of the red courthouse, and we didn't have all the parking problems. I get in my automobile. You could hear the parade, the noise from the parade. I drove across the Houston Street Viaduct in order to hit the highway to go to Austin. And impulsively, I said, I want to have time to have my hair fixed in Austin, so I'll go by, let's see, was it Fair Tyches, the beauty salon, and get my hair freshened so I could go on to Austin. And again, it's about maybe 10 minutes or less trip from the red courthouse. And as I walked in the door...
This is real long, so I'm going to put the link in the description box, because the tape's about to run out.
So I asked if I could use the phone. I knew if anyone knew anything, it would be just Kellum in Austin, because they carried all 3 networks. So I called Jess and I said, what is going on? First, I called Lou Sterrett at downtown. And I said, my God, what has happened, Lou? And here are people that should have been out at the trademark for the luncheon, but they were still downtown.